Welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen. Ukraine, central theme of the EU talks in Brussels, and whether Russian assets frozen in Europe should be diverted to Kyiv for the war effort. The support of the 27 states is under the spotlight increasingly as doubts persist over America's continued financing of the Ukrainian resistance. The EU has a new fund called the Ukraine Facility. An initial payment of 4.5 billion euros has been paid to Kyiv, part of a 50 billion euro pot to help assure the essential functions of the Ukrainian state. But the issue of weapons and military hardware represents another level completely, with EU leaders urging member states to put production onto a war footing. There's a packed agenda over the EU Council, defence, the Middle East, expanding the bloc, migration, agriculture, but it's Ukraine that is the central theme. Let's introduce you to our guests for this debate. Joining us from Kyiv live is Peter Zalmayev. Peter, good evening. Peter's director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative.
Good evening.
Good evening to you, sir. Great to have you with us. Joining us live from Washington, Melinda Herring, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre. Melinda, thanks for being with us as always.
Pleasure. Thanks, Mark.
And joining us from Brussels, our Europe editor, Armen Georgian. Armen, stand by. Coming back to you in a second. Before we let our guests loose to talk about the issues, let's hear from two men whose views are quite central to what's going on right at this present moment in time. One of them will be at the EU meeting, the other one will not. They are Dmitry Peskov, Kremlin spokesperson, and Joseph Borrell, the EU's foreign policy chief.
I hope that we can reach an agreement soon and change banknotes into weapons, because your soldiers don't fight with banknotes. They need physical arms. They need physical instruments in order to defend your people.
We will use all possible judicial mechanisms that are available. We will, without mirroring, but to the extent that it corresponds to our interests, choose other methods for response actions.
Let's go straight to Armen Georgian, who's waiting for us in Brussels to get the first viewpoint of what is going on in this meeting in Brussels. Central, of course, to this is the situation in Ukraine. Armen, what can you tell us from where you are?
Well, it's become a bit of a tradition, Mark, for President Zelenskyy of Ukraine to address EU summit leaders. Most summits he's done this virtually by video conference, and today was no exception. He was really trying to put the heat on EU leaders on a couple of things. Defense and agriculture, I would say, perhaps the two most important elements of Zelenskyy's address a bit earlier this afternoon. On the defense side, he gave some very concrete illustrations to EU leaders of why things need to be speeded up on the EU side. He mentioned, of course, the missile attacks on Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities, saying that it's not a question of numbers, but of having enough air defenses to protect all of Ukraine's cities. So that was a point he wanted to hammer home to leaders here. And on the agricultural question, as you know, that's been a big sticking point among the various EU member states as to whether to continue this special access that Ukraine was granted to the EU markets at the beginning of the war. And the idea behind that was that Ukraine had lost much of its much of its coastline in the south and its usual routes to the rest of the world. Its airports were no longer functioning and are still not functioning, actually. And so, therefore, Ukraine was granted this special access to the EU market in particular, but we've seen over time of Polish farmers as well as the agricultural sector in other countries, Romania and other parts of the EU, increasingly frustrated about what they say is unfair competition from the Ukrainian farming sector, and we've had this U-turn now from President Macron of France, who has basically joined the camp that includes Poland, that wants to end this special access that Ukraine has. At the moment, in the draft summit conclusions that I've seen, basically the EU is executing interests, but we'll have to see what actually comes out on top at the end of this summit. The EU leaders are saying, on the one hand, they do recognize that farmers are having a really tough time, and that there has to be fair competition for farmers in the EU. And at the same time, EU leaders are saying in these draft conclusions, we also recognize that Ukraine has to restore its agricultural exports. Well, you can't really have it both ways. Something has got to give.
Indeed. Armen, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in Peter Zalmayev for the first of his many comments in this debate, Director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Peter, thank you, as always, for being with us here. We've heard from Armen that the EU Council is looking at Ukraine on two levels, of course, arms supply and the agriculture issue. But, of course, the existential challenge that you are facing and have been facing since Vladimir Putin's full-on invasion is still so overwhelming. If you don't get the arms to finish the job, of course, there may not be a Ukrainian agricultural sector to defend. That's the situation, really, isn't it, I suppose?
Indeed. You know, I'm here actually. All day I've been attending this Kyiv Security Forum in Kyiv, and there's a lot of dignitaries. And for the first time, we have Rob Bauer, who's the head of NATO's military commission, the highest ranked military representative from NATO. And he said something very poignant today. He said that as excessively optimistic as we were in 2023, expecting tremendous success from Ukraine's counteroffensive, and that was a mistake. We should not do the same mistake, but in the opposite direction, and be too pessimistic in 2024. Ukrainians are continuing to perform miracles in the battlefield and teaching the essential lesson of courage to all the world. And they're doing miracles. They've already slowed down tremendously Russia's counter offensive that we're seeing outside of Avdiivka, lacking sufficient, forces, lacking sufficient artillery shells. And Bauer said that, they need more of our help. We've given them a lot, but we need to do more. The rest, Ukrainians will do the rest. This is no time to slow down. This is no time to grow despondent. Vladimir Putin has announced that this is an existential battle for him, but his army has proven time and again that they can actually lose battles, and Ukraine can win these battles. And right now it's a do or die moment for Ukraine, now that Congress is at loggerheads over continued supplies of aid. It is essentially a European problem. Europeans should really come to a firm decision and start acting accordingly.
Peter, bear with us. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Let's bring in from Washington, Melinda Herring. Melinda is the Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre. Melinda, thanks for being with us here on the France 24 debate. You heard Peter's words, Armen's briefing from Brussels. There is this issue that if that money that the Biden administration has set aside for Ukraine, some $60 billion, is still stuck in Congress, if that isn't unblocked at some time soon, this shortage of ammunition that Ukraine is suffering will become something that is beyond critical.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, we're already seeing the results of sitting on our hands here in Washington. Congress is way overdue to pass this bill. It's $62 billion. It's not moving right now. The Senate has passed it. The House has not passed it. And there's a group of Republicans, Speaker Mike Johnson from Louisiana, won't allow this bill on the floor. And we know, Mark, if the bill were allowed on the floor, it would pass very easily. So the question now, everyone's consulting the obscure rules of the House of Representatives. There's ways to make the bill move. It's called a discharge petition. And we're waiting for 33 more signatures. A lot of Democrats have already backed it, but we need more Democrats and more Republicans to bring this bill to the floor. But what does it mean? It's $62 billion. It means that Europe has had to look in the couch cushions and really step up. The Czechs have pledged to bring 800,000 shells to Ukraine, and they've already secured 300,000. And those shells should arrive very soon, and it will give the Ukrainians a bit of relief. But this money is desperately needed. Peter said it well. This is the moment. There hasn't been a more delicate moment in the war since the beginning of the war.
And in terms of what this means, who is actually blocking this money right now? Because one hears it's Trump supporters, but in terms of real numbers, how many people does this add up to?
So in order to use this discharge petition, you need 218 signatures. There are 185, so we're missing 33 signatures. And when you look at who signed and who hasn't, we're missing progressive Democrats and Republicans. So I think that there's probably at least 10 Republicans, maybe more, that are sort of Reaganite that would be willing to sign this. But signing the discharge petition is the ultimate act of betrayal. It's saying that we don't have confidence in our leader. So it's very politically dicey. We need more Democrats to sign the petition before some of these Republicans would be willing to sign it. But look, there's pressure on Mike Johnson. He's the speaker. Some people say that he's going to bring a bill, that he might bring a bill with loans. I don't believe it. Mike Johnson has had months and months to bring this bill to the floor. I think he's just playing the clock down until it's election season here.
Melinda Herring, thank you very much indeed. Melinda from the Atlantic Council, the Eurasia section there. Thanks as always. Let's go back to Peter Zalmayev, who's joining us live from Kyiv. Kyiv, of course, was struck today by Russian missiles for the first time in some 40 days. Peter, can you give us a sense of the mood where you are? Clearly, we're hearing about what's happened. We're hearing about the damage, but you're there. Give us a sense of how things are.
Well, this indeed has been a long time since we heard this sort of rattling of windows and shaking of houses in Kyiv. And, you know, as often the case, it came at a propitious and very auspicious time. Now that, you know, Jake Sullivan, Biden's security advisor, was wrapping up his visit, and all these dignitaries, including the NATO representative, which I mentioned, Admiral Rob Bauer, had just gotten into Kyiv for the conference today. So they actually had the privilege of experiencing firsthand what it feels like living in Ukraine in the past 2 years. Obviously, Vladimir Putin is more than upset about what's happening in the south of Russia, in the Belgorod region, where there's Russian insurgents fighting with the aid of the Ukrainian army. Obviously, there are shellings in that area. Putin is showing quite a high degree of impotence. He's not been able to deal with this issue. That's exposing him as weak. You know, so this is a retaliation. We have it on good authority that he was targeting specifically the military intelligence agency, which has been actually very successful in several spectacular operations in the past, including, the shooting down of Russian airplanes and also disabling critical infrastructure in Russia, sabotaging, oil refineries, etc. So that was the target. That's what Vladimir Putin is doing. But once again, this does not change the calculation for us or for him. We are as resilient, as angry as is ever possible. If he is counting on Ukrainians ceasing their resistance, this is a fool's errand. It's not going to happen.
Indeed, Russian strikes in Mykolaiv as well earlier, claiming lives. We understand, Peter, some gains by the Russians in the Donbass, or is that something that's kind of exaggerated by Russian reporting?
Well, I mean, you just have to go back to those reports of the last year since we got those Patriot systems, how they've destroyed probably more Patriot systems by a factor of 5 than we ever got them. I mean, the lies are out of this world, just like the figure at the presidential elections, 87% of the report. Now we're hearing that figure was inflated by 35 million fraudulent votes. And that's how it is in Russia. It's a make-believe universe they're living in. And so, yes, they're exaggerating their successes. Just today, our military chief, the chief general, Mr. Syrskyi, has announced that we have pretty much stopped the Russian counteroffensive in the Donbass. Imagine what we could do if we got like a couple of 100,000 more artillery shells, 55 millimeter. We'd probably be able to mount a new counteroffensive. And Mr. Budanov, our military intelligence chief, is saying that once we get them, if we get them, we're going to be able to mount a counteroffensive again, hopefully before the summer.
Peter Zalmayev of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to Melinda Herring of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre. Thanks to our Europe editor, Armin Georgian, who joined us at the start of the programme. And thanks to you for watching. We'll continue to bring you more, of course, on the situation in Ukraine and the continuation of the EU's discussion about all the circumstances. Stay with us here on France 24.